Hello, all you freedom-loving people. Welcome to another episode of Front Page. I'm your host, Scott Cameron Goulet. The Department of Justice is seeking a protective order. This would require President Trump to not release the DOJ evidence in the classified document case to the public. But there's always good news for the president, too. A New York State judge is insisting on a fair and impartial approach to the criminal investigation into President Trump's alleged tax violations. The DA closed a multi-year criminal investigation against President Trump. A white Starbucks district manager has won a lawsuit. The case was involving white discrimination against black people, but this is actually an example of how the overall situation is changing for the better. We also have a true spy story for you today. In a contract bid for the 5G project of Denmark's largest telecom group, the Chinese company Huawei changed its bid at the last minute. Huawei's offer was only a little lower than that of its rival's price. So how was Huawei able to estimate its rival so accurately? We'll give you the full inside story. Okay, let's get into it. The Department of Justice has filed a motion to block President Trump from publicly disclosing any evidence that his legal team will be allowed access to by prosecutors in the case of the classified documents. Special counsel Jack Smith's team asked for a protective order in a new filing on Friday, and the presiding judge referred the matter to U.S. District Judge Bruce Reinhart. Judge Reinhart granted a search warrant last year for an FBI raid of President Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. Smith's motion for a protective order notes that among the materials that prosecutors will hand over to Trump's lawyers is information about ongoing investigations, including sensitive and confidential information. The materials also include information that could be used to identify people and information that reveals investigative techniques. The motion reads, the disclosure of which could compromise those investigations and identify uncharged individuals. Smith had spoken to attorneys for President Trump, and they raised no objection to the protective order. There's also a lot of good news these days. A Democratic district attorney in New York, Westchester County, Mimi Rocah, has closed a multi-year criminal investigation against President Trump for so-called tax irregularities. Rocah did not file any charges against President Trump or his companies or against the Trump Organization. Rocah, who is a Democrat, started investigating President Trump in 2021. She was seeking to determine if President Trump or the Trump Organization provided officials with misleading valuations in an effort to shrink the tax bill on his Trump National Golf Club in Briarcliff Manor. The Democratic district attorney said in a statement that was published by the Associated Press that she made the decision after an investigation was objective and independent of politics, partisanship, and personal or political beliefs. The district attorney noted that her decision was more important than ever as a way to imply support for President Trump and to emphasize that justice in America must be independent of politics. Rocah said, it's really important, more important than ever in our country, to make sure that people understand we have independent prosecutors. We have a justice system that operates independent of politics. I can stand here and proudly say that I'm one of those prosecutors, and I look at every subject of any investigation, every organization that's subject of an investigation the same way. Yes, there are still good people in every party and in every profession, and of course there are bad people in every party and every industry also. A person is judged by his or her moral standards, by his or her behavior, not by his or her political views or other external labels. President Trump praised Rocah's decision in all caps on Truth Social. President Trump stressed that all the allegations against him were false and a smear on his reputation. President Trump wrote, "This was the honorable thing to do, in that I did nothing wrong, but where and when do I get my reputation back? When will the other fake cases against me be dropped? Election interference." Let's take a look at a case study about discrimination. Miss Shannon Phillips was a regional manager for Starbucks in Philadelphia. A few years ago, Phillips was fired after one of her stores allegedly discriminated against black people. This is a pretty common accusation, right? People think that when things go wrong, they are being discriminated against because of their skin color. Miss Phillips sued Starbucks for the racial discrimination against her. On the face of it, the plaintiff had a case, but it would have been difficult to win in the current political climate because Miss Phillips is white, but she won, and she was paid a large sum as compensation. This case, which involves a very sensitive discrimination issue at the moment, began in 2018. One day in April of 2018, two black men, Dante Robinson and Rashawn Nelson, walked into a Starbucks store in Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia. They were waiting for a third person for a business meeting. They occupied a table, but they didn't make a purchase. They asked to use the restroom inside Starbucks, but they were told the cafe's bathrooms were for customers only. The black men immediately argued with the staff. The staff then asked the two black men to leave the store. The altercation between the two parties caused a large crowd to gather. A manager called the police. Shortly after, the police then arrived at the coffee shop. After a brief understanding of the situation, the police took out handcuffs and escorted the two men who did not want to leave the store. Other customers in the store took videos of the scene with their cell phones and they posted them on social media. The videos quickly reposted on social media with the slogan, "Starbucks coffee is anti-black." The reaction of the public was quite violent. After the discrimination incident, the Starbucks Rittenhouse Square store was quickly surrounded by people. Some people held signs outside the store in protest, while others stormed into the store to protest. In response, police had to be deployed to guard the Rittenhouse Starbucks from the angry crowd. The protests spread to other parts of the United States, with people holding signs and chanting boycotts in front of Starbucks in many major cities. It was clear that Starbucks had suffered an unprecedented PR crisis, so management acted decisively and quickly. Shortly after the discrimination incident, Starbucks announced that the company would shut down its stores across the United States for one day. The closing was for mandatory anti-bias training for all employees. Then a conference was held in order to apologize again to the public and to announce the store manager had been fired. Less than a month later, Shannon Phillips, the regional manager in Philadelphia, who managed more than 100 Starbucks stores in the Philadelphia area, was also fired. Phillips had worked for Starbucks for about 13 years. The store where the discrimination incident occurred was under her supervision. The reason for termination, according to the complaint, was that the situation is not recoverable. In Phillips' view, she was being used as a tool to solve a public relations crisis. Not only her, but the white employees of the entire Philadelphia Starbucks workplace were suffering. For example, Phillips was fired as the regional manager of the store involved in the incident, while the black district manager of the store involved in the incident was unharmed. And another white manager in the same area was also fired. All of this made Phillips furious. In her opinion, Starbucks leadership is intentionally taking advantage of white employees just to quell the anger of non-white employees, especially blacks, and the public after the discrimination incident. In 2019, an angry Phillips found a lawyer and after gathering a series of evidence, decisively took Starbucks to court. The trial was repeatedly delayed due to the epidemic until last week, when the first trial was finally completed. Phillips' attorney called several witnesses, including Phillips' former co-workers. They admitted that Phillips was a hard-working manager who took the blame for the discrimination incident because she was white. After a lengthy trial, a grand jury returned a verdict that Starbucks violated the state's law prohibiting racial discrimination by unjustifiably firing Phillips, a regional manager, after a discrimination incident at its Rittenhouse Square store, simply because she was white. The fact of Phillips' complaints were established. The court then ordered Starbucks to pay Phillips $600,000 in damages plus $25 million in punitive damages. So there are sober and rational thinking people in any region. We certainly hope that our judicial system will return to normal from now on. Next, we're going to talk about a Business Insider story that happened in Denmark. The incident has never been fully reported, but the whole process is like a modern-day spy movie. If we were to make a movie about it, I would set the first shot back on March 5th, 2019. At that time, TDC, which is the largest telecom group in Denmark, was considering whether to choose China's Huawei or Sweden's Ericsson in order to build a 5G network for Denmark. And after a winter of consideration, TDC still did not have a final decision. On March 5th, Huawei's Danish subsidiary suddenly submitted an urgent revised bid for the 5G contract. The new offer was only slightly lower than that of its rival Ericsson, so the president of TDC looked at the new offer with a cloud of doubt. He wondered, was there a hacking attack? Or is there an inside spy? Why did Huawei know to come in at this lower bid at the last moment? Then the scene shifts to 6 years earlier. In 2013, TDC and Huawei signed a 6-year, $700 million contract in order to build and manage TDC's 3G and 4G wireless network in Denmark. At that time, Huawei was making a big push into Europe. They first won a contract to build a 3G network in the Netherlands in 2004. This was followed by another similar contract in the UK. Then in 2009, they started working on the Danish TDC business. In 2009, Huawei sent Jason Yong Lan to Denmark as a manager of Huawei's Danish branch in order to complete this task. According to Yang Lan's LinkedIn profile, he joined Huawei in 2005. 3 years later, he worked in Sweden for a year before being promoted to a position in Denmark. Huawei was facing strong competition from Ericsson. Sweden, where Ericsson is located, is Denmark's neighboring country, and the two countries have deep political and cultural ties. According to a former TDC executive and to two former senior Danish officials who had worked closely with Yang Lan, TDC was persuaded to be open to Huawei, and TDC technical staff were even said to be unhappy with Ericsson's reliability. Despite the fact that TDC's network handles confidential data for the Danish government, Danish officials accepted the partnership with the CCP-controlled Huawei. This shows just how strong Yang Lan's lobbying skills were. Huawei has been facing allegations that its equipment is being used for espionage. Although Huawei strongly denies it, the facts and the evidence are to the contrary. In 2012, Australian officials notified U.S. officials of a complex intrusion involving Huawei equipment. According to Australia, hackers from a Chinese spy agency were copying large amounts of data from Australia's telecommunications system, and they were sending it to China. The incident is considered particularly serious because the code used in the hack was provided through a Huawei software update. This suggests that Huawei approved the operation or that Huawei technicians have been infiltrated by the Chinese Communist Party's intelligence officers. According to two former Danish officials involved in these discussions, the U.S. intelligence agency was already lobbying its European counterparts to stick with European suppliers, but Denmark went the other way. However, TDC and the Danish government did have security concerns about Huawei. According to former TDC executives and to two former Danish officials, Huawei eventually agreed to an unusual deal. The deal said TDC could send its Huawei equipment for use to a special testing facility in the United Kingdom for testing. The code in the Huawei devices would be checked for any unauthorized modification. Only after the security approval was granted was it allowed to be used in Denmark. In this way, over the past decade, Huawei has taken a commanding lead in serving telecom providers in Africa, Asia, and Europe. Huawei was far surpassing its two strongest competitors, Ericsson of Sweden and Nokia of Finland. In 2016, Huawei was poised to sign another new 5G contract with TDC before the 3G and 4G contracts expired. At that time, both Huawei and its competitors were starting to build 5G networks. 5G operates at higher frequencies than 4G. 5G provides greater bandwidth and faster speeds, but because the higher frequency signals do not travel far, the system requires more transceivers and more advanced software in order to manage it all. Denmark was one of the first European countries to launch a 5G system. For Huawei and its competitors, this was an opportunity to lock up billions of dollars in global contracts. TDC's 5G tender process began in late 2018. At the time, there were still some influential executives and managers at TDC who were still firmly behind Huawei. But within the Danish government, some of the officials who approved the 2013 contract became suspicious of Huawei. Although TDC and Huawei had established procedures for security clearance of its equipment, Huawei often avoided security clearance during the implementation process, citing administrative delays in sending products. A former Danish official said that TDC had to install and use Huawei equipment and software that had not been sent to the UK for testing on several occasions. In February of 2019, Huawei submitted what was supposed to be the final version of its bid and offer. This offer was much higher than that of its only competitor, Ericsson of Sweden. But a few weeks later, on March 5th, Huawei Denmark submitted an urgent revised version of its 5G contract bid to TDC without warning. This was a very unusual occurrence. What's even more strange is that Huawei's new offer was just a little bit lower than Ericsson's. This is the same scenario that we saw at the beginning of our story. The bidders were not supposed to know each other's bids, in quotes, and their respective bids were kept strictly confidential within TDC, with only about 12 people having access to them. So what caused Huawei to make their new offer? Was it just a sixth sense, or did they get inside information? On the day of March 5th, TDC and Huawei held a hasty meeting. The meeting was chaired by Jens Alose, the Senior Executive Vice President of TDC, and Yang Lan, the manager of Huawei's Danish branch. Alose arrived at the meeting in a wary mood. He noticed that Yang Lan had an atypical swagger that day and that he was very confident and took a more aggressive attitude than usual. Alose described this in a report that was prepared by the company's security team later. Yang Lan seemed to have known what was going on. So Alose cut off the meeting after confirming that Huawei had been briefed on Ericsson's bid. The first thing TDC needed to do was to investigate how Huawei got Ericsson's bid information. But we'll have to leave this for tomorrow. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember that every like, comment, and share helps more people to see the truth. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have already subscribed, we thank you, but please double check to make sure that you are still subscribed, because we've heard from some of our audience members that they're somehow unsubscribed without their knowledge. Okay, this is our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth. Again, thank you for watching Front Page, and we will see you next time.